The night sky glowed with red fire as the last parts of the city burned. The palace towers were cracked and broken, and smoke covered the courtyards. The kingdom was falling apart, stone by stone, under the weight of war. Soldiers shouted along the walls, their voices full of fear and anger. They could see the enemies outside, strong and endless, pressing into their land. Daniel Hayes, once only a medic on Earth, now found himself in the middle of this storm. His heart raced as bricks and sparks rained around him. He had worked on broken bones and wounds before, but he had never faced something like this. Here it was not just about healing, it was about survival. Daniel had been sent with the royal guard to reach the princess, who had been missing since the collapse in the western side of the palace. He pushed through the ruins, his uniform dirty with ash and blood. His hands were already cut from lifting blocks that had fallen in his way. He heard muffled cries, soft and trapped, from beneath a broken archway. His chest tightened at the sound, and he hurried forward. The cries grew weaker, almost drowned by the sound of fire, eating its way through wooden beams above. He dropped to his knees and dug with his bare hands, ignoring sharp stones digging into his skin. Dust stung his eyes and made it hard to breathe. After long, painful minutes, he found her. A girl in torn velvet robes, her pale face scratched and gray. It was Princess Claire. Her dress was smeared with blood and dirt, her hair clung to her cheeks in knots, and her eyes fluttered weakly, open with a faint light. Daniel pulled the rubble off her body and lifted her head into his arms. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, each inhale smaller than the last. He checked her pulse with a practiced hand and felt panic rise in his throat. Her blood ran hot, poisoned by something unnatural. Her veins darkened, and her body shivered with fever. "No," Daniel whispered sharply, holding her tighter. "Stay with me." In that moment, he remembered his training and every book he had read since leaving Earth. Diseases on this world were strange, often deadly, because their bodies had never been exposed to them before. But human blood had its own strange strength. He had read reports in the military camps, experiments whispered about, that human blood sometimes fought sicknesses that destroyed others. Daniel had never believed he would test such a thing himself. There was no medicine left in his satchel, only broken tools and strips of cloth. No modern aid could reach them in time. Looking down at Claire's still face, Daniel made his choice. He pulled a knife from his belt, quick and without hesitation, cut along his arm, not too deep but sharp enough for red streams to pour. He pressed the wound against hers, pressing skin to skin, letting his blood run into the cuts and sickness that stained her veins. His body shook with pain, but he kept his grip solid. Claire gasped, her eyes pressing open wider as warmth entered her. Slowly, the trembling that shook through her body eased, though she did not yet rise from weakness. Her lips, pale before, gained a small hint of color. The dark blue lines along her skin eased into a softer shade, no longer spreading as fast. Daniel felt himself growing weak, sweat gathering on his forehead, but he refused to stop. He held there for long minutes, forcing himself not to black out. His body had become the medicine, his blood flowing where no cure existed. Finally, she stirred. Her small voice scratched at the silence, faint but real. "Who? Who are you?" Daniel lowered his head, breathing hard, and tried to smile, though he could barely hold himself up. "Someone who is not letting you die tonight." Fire cracked above, and part of the arch gave way. Dust fell over them, but Daniel clutched the princess close as the air grew darker. He had nothing left to give but his body, and his body was enough. He pushed himself to his feet, staggering, holding her as though she weighed nothing. Through the black smoke, he saw a narrow path lit by firelight. He stepped one difficult stride at a time, carrying the princess against his chest. His blood was still dripping onto her dress, staining it red, but her heartbeat was steadier than before. The palace groaned and the walls sounded like giants falling in pain, but Daniel did not stop. The world might fall apart, yet he had already decided he would not let her slip from his arms. Tonight, no force would take her life, not while his life still burned inside him. The corridors of the half-broken palace echoed with the sound of hurried boots. Daniel staggered through one of the side tunnels, holding Claire tight in his arms. His vision blurred at times, but he forced himself to keep moving. She was breathing, faint but steady, her head leaning softly on his shoulder. Guards had discovered him at last, their armor clashing in clumsy rhythm as they rushed toward him. They took Claire from his arms carefully, treating her like fragile glass. Two men shouted for a healer and called for the inner gates to be opened. Commander raised his sword high, shouting for the soldiers to form a shield line. Through the heavy smoke and fire, Daniel watched them clear the path to the Queen's Hall. When the group reached the last set of golden doors, they burst open with a storm of voices. At the end of the hall stood Queen Eleanor, tall and stern, her crown dull with ash that floated in through shattered windows. She stepped forward quickly when she saw her daughter limp in the arms of her guard. Claire was laid down on a velvet couch, and the Queen knelt beside her with shaking hands. Her fingers brushed the girl's cheek, and for a brief moment her cold mask broke. "Claire," the Queen whispered, her eyes wet yet sharp. Then her gaze turned to Daniel. "What has happened to her? Tell me, or lose your life where you stand." Daniel's mouth felt dry. He wiped blood from his arm and stood straighter, though his knees wanted to bend. "She was poisoned," he said slowly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Something moved in her veins. There was no cure, not in this place. "I gave her my own blood. It fought the sickness. It saved her." The hall froze. The soldiers turned their heads, some in shock, others in disbelief. A counselor, an old man with narrow eyes, stepped forward to stare at Daniel. "You shared your blood. You crossed into the blood of royalty with your own," the man said with disgust. The Queen's expression hardened like iron. She stood, her voice cold again, and looked down at Daniel. "You touched my daughter's life in a way no subject or stranger should ever touch. You may believe you saved her, but you may also have altered her bloodline forever. Do you know what you have done?" Daniel met her eyes with the last of his strength. "I know that I kept her alive," he said, each word measured. For a long moment, the hall stayed silent, except for the heavy breathing of guards. Claire stirred weakly on the couch. Her lips parted, and she whispered, "Mother, he saved me. Let him be." Her voice was faint but carried enough weight to fill the space. The Queen turned to her daughter, her jaw tightening, but she did not answer. Finally, she beckoned the guards with a quick wave of her hand. "Take him," she ordered. "He will not leave these walls. His blood is no longer his own. If he can save, he will save when I command it. He belongs to the crown." Daniel felt cold hands grip his arms and pull him back. He did not resist, though anger flared in his chest. He had given all he had, and now he was shackled like a prisoner. He glanced one last time at Claire. Her tired eyes followed him, wide and worried, as he was dragged from the room. The Queen did not look at him again. She turned her gaze back to her daughter and called for more healers. Ignoring the trail of blood, Daniel's boots left on the pristine floor. Behind the doors that slammed shut, the fate of Daniel Hayes had been twisted without his choice. The halls beyond were long and shadowed. Soldiers pushed him into a chamber lit only by a single lamp. The walls were carved stone, cold and bare. There was a bed, a chair, and nothing more. The door closed behind him with a sharp crack, and the heavy lock snapped into place. Daniel sank onto the bed, his body trembling with weakness. He tied cloth around the cut on his arm, pressing until the bleeding stopped. His breath came in shallow bursts, and he stared up at the ceiling with numb eyes. For a moment he thought of Earth, of the river that had flowed gently through his hometown, far away from crowns and prisons. Then he thought of Claire, her frail voice defending him, even as her mother's power crushed any mercy. That was how the night ended, not with freedom or thanks, but with Daniel caged in the heart of the palace he had saved. And outside, the sound of war still pulsed through the city, dark and endless, as though the world itself had not noticed one man's sacrifice. Daniel woke to the sound of muffled voices outside his chamber door. He lay on the small bed, staring at the stone ceiling above. The lamp in the corner had burned low, leaving the room in shadows. He felt weak, his arm still bandaged from the cut he had given himself. The pain was dull now, but his body felt drained, as if part of his soul had been poured out with his blood. The door unlocked suddenly. A guard stepped inside with a tray of food and water. He set it on the small table and left without a word. The door locked again with the same hard snap. Daniel sat up slowly and forced himself to eat, though each bite tasted of ash. He kept thinking of Claire. He wondered if she was stronger now, if her fever had passed. He pictured her voice when she had tried to defend him against her mother, and that memory gave him a little strength. Hours crawled by. The chamber was quiet except for the faint banging of hammers somewhere in the distance, workers repairing parts of the palace. Sometimes he thought he could hear crying or the low rhythm of drums far away. He counted breaths, steps, moments, and told himself he would not break. It was near midnight when the door opened again. This time, it was not a guard. Claire slipped into the room, dressed in a plain robe, her golden hair braided back to hide her features. She closed the door softly behind her and stood still, her eyes shining in the dim light. Daniel rose to his feet at once. "You should not be here," he whispered. She shook her head gently. "I had to see you. They say you are locked in here like a prisoner, and it is true. It is wrong." He looked at her carefully. She was pale but no longer trembling. Her voice carried more strength than it had when he found her under the rubble. His chest eased a little at that sight. "You are alive," he said simply. "I am because of you," she answered quickly, stepping closer. "I felt it. When your blood touched mine, I felt fire, and then the sickness faded. You gave me part of your life, and now they chain you for it." Daniel turned his face away. "Your mother does not see it that way. To her, I have done something unforgivable. To her, I am dangerous." Claire came closer, her hand brushing his bandaged arm. "You are not dangerous. You are the bravest person I have ever known. My mother fears what she does not control. She believes your gift belongs only to her. I will not let her lock you away." Her words struck him deeply. For a moment, Daniel closed his eyes. Had never imagined a princess would speak to him in this way. On Earth, he was only a medic from a quiet town, unnoticed and ordinary. Yet here she stood, calling him brave, calling him hers in spirit. They sat together in silence for a long moment. The air between them carried both warmth and fear. Finally, Claire whispered, "There are whispers in the castle. Some believe you are a miracle. The guards talk about you with pride, but the council calls you a threat. They tell my mother you must be kept until they learn every secret in your blood." Daniel's chest tightened. "Then I am a prisoner for life," he said. "No," Claire replied firmly. "I will not allow it. If you stay here, they will use you until there is nothing left to give. I will not watch them take you apart piece by piece. You are more than what runs in your veins." Her determination lit a spark inside him. He straightened and looked at her with tired but stronger eyes. "And what would you do, princess? Challenge the queen herself?" She gave a small, sad laugh. "Perhaps. I may be her daughter, but I am also my own person. I will not stand aside while you rot in shadows after saving me." Daniel studied her, the weight of her words sinking deep. She truly meant it. He felt torn between hope and despair. He could not imagine escaping the queen's power, yet Claire's presence made him believe in something more. The night grew still as she leaned closer, her hand now holding his. "Promise me you will not give up, Daniel," she whispered. "God, promise me you will fight to live. No matter what chains she throws around you." He met her eyes and gave the only answer he could. "I promise." Footsteps echoed outside, sharp and heavy. Claire stood quickly and pressed her hand to his cheek, just once before slipping back to the door. She whispered, "Hold on to the promise," and then she was gone, leaving Daniel in silence once again. He sat back on the bed, his heart racing faster than before. The bars on the window still held, the lock still clicked behind the door, and the shadows still pressed him in. But something inside him had changed. There was fire now, a fire he did not know he carried before. And in that fire, Daniel no longer felt alone. The morning sun broke through the shattered windows of the palace, but its light felt colder than the night. Daniel was pulled from his chamber by 2 guards and marched down the long halls. His steps echoed against the stone, heavy and slow. The doors of the war chamber opened, and he was forced inside. Maps lay scattered across the large table, marked with notes and tokens of battle. Around it stood the Queen's Council, tall men and women draped in robes of authority. Their eyes were sharp, following Daniel as though he were not a man but an object placed in their hands. At the far end of the table stood Queen Eleanor, with her crown shining in the weak light. She raised her chin. "Come forward." The guards pushed Daniel closer. His wounded arm throbbed under the bandage, but he stood as straight as he could manage. He waited, his jaw tight, as the Queen's eyes judged him with cold patience. At last, her voice filled the chamber. This man has changed the fate of my daughter. He did so by spilling his blood into hers. What could not be cured by healers was cast away by him. He is not like us, yet he stands here breathing, while others with the same sickness lie buried. For that, he is both a gift and a danger. The counselor who had spoken against him before nodded firmly. He must remain here, Your Majesty. If he is allowed to leave, the people will learn of him. Stories will spread. Others will try to claim his blood for themselves. The kingdom must keep him as ours, and his secret must never leave these walls. Queen Eleanor turned her gaze back to Daniel. Her dark eyes gave away nothing of mercy. From this day forward, you belong to the crown. You will heal our soldiers when commanded. You will keep your blood hidden until called. Do not attempt to leave. Do not attempt to resist. The punishment will be death. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Her words bound him tighter than any chains the guards could place on him. Yet he stayed silent, for silence was the only answer left to him. But a voice broke into the chamber. No. Princess Claire stood in the doorway. Her breathing was heavy from running, and her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were alive with fire. Every figure in the chamber turned as she stepped forward. She stopped beside Daniel, her small frame seeming almost fragile against the tall soldiers, yet her presence shook the silence. He saved me, Claire declared. If not for him, I would be in the grave. No counsel, no law, no weapon could have stopped the poison that ran in my veins. He gave me his life when no one else could. And now you would lock him up and use him until he is gone. It's not justice. That is cruelty. The queen's jaw hardened. Claire, you will not speak out of turn. Return to your chambers. I will not, Claire demanded. She turned to the council. You call him dangerous, but the truth is you fear him. No. You fear what you cannot control. Daniel is not a weapon. He is a man. If you strip him of his freedom, then the crown itself will be stained. The room filled with murmurs. For a heartbeat, the council seemed shaken by her boldness, but the queen silenced them with one sharp gesture. You think because he saved you, he belongs to you? The queen said bitterly. You are young, and your heart is soft. Love and gratitude will not guard this throne. Kingdom needs more than feelings. It needs power, and this man carries it in his blood. She pointed toward Daniel, her face strict as stone. He is mine to command. Daniel met Claire's eyes for only a moment. He saw her fury, her unwillingness to surrender, and his own heart lifted with the strength of her defiance. But the soldiers now stepped closer, waiting for the queen's orders. Take him back to his chamber, Eleanor said coldly. Lock him with tighter chains. He must learn that freedom has no place here. The guards pulled Daniel by the arms and began to drag him out. He did not resist, but he turned his head and locked eyes with Claire until the doors shut between them. He was returned to the stone room. Iron shackles were placed on his wrists and ankles, making even small movements heavy. The guards left him with nothing but silence and the echo of his own breaths against the walls. He sat there, back pressed against the cold rock, and whispered to himself, I promised her. I will not give up. Claire, meanwhile, stood alone in the war chamber, her fists clenched, as her mother's voice gave new orders to the council. The fires of war outside grew louder, and within the palace another fire began to grow. One born not of armies, but of a daughteress will, to defy the throne for the sake of one man's freedom. The palace was wrapped in shadows when the festival trumpets began to play outside. The people in the city cheered to drive away the fear of war for one night, their voices rising through the streets with music and laughter. But behind the palace walls, Daniel sat chained in his chamber, his wrists sore and heavy from the iron cuffs. He listened to the sound of celebration and wondered if the queen's prisoners ever felt its warmth. He thought of Claire and the fire in her eyes, and his promise not to give up. The lock turned softly. The door opened just enough for a small figure to slip inside. It was Claire again, her robe plain, her face hidden under a dark hood. She shut the door quickly and hurried to him. You should not be here, Daniel said quietly, though his heart beat faster at the sight of her. I told you I would not let them cage you forever, she whispered. She pulled a small ring of keys from her sleeve and bent down to unlock his chains. The keys rattled with her unsteady hands, but one by one the locks released. Daniel rubbed his wrists when they came free, surprised at the strength burning inside him despite the days he had been locked up. Claire, he said carefully, if your mother finds out, she will see this as treason. She could take everything from you. She already took something from me, Claire answered firmly. She tried to take away the man who saved me, and I cannot let her. He stood in silence for a moment, staring at her. He nodded. Then we go together. They moved quickly through the corridor, the sounds of the festival drowning out the noise of their steps. Servants were distracted, guards were posted at the outer gates and banquet halls, but the lower passages were silent. Claire led Daniel through doors he had never seen, small staircases and tunnels all hidden from sight. At times the walls hummed with the sound of drums and trumpets, but Daniel's focus stayed sharp. He kept close to Claire, his body alert for dangers. When they reached the outer courtyard, a group of soldiers stood at the far end. Daniel froze, but Claire pulled him behind a column and whispered. The soldiers lifted their heads as fireworks burst in the sky, their attention drawn upward as lights spilled across the stone walls. In that moment of distraction, Claire tugged Daniel through the shadows and into the old stables beyond. The stables smelled of hay and smoke. Horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, nervous from the noise outside. Claire quickly unlatched one, a tall black horse with restless eyes. Daniel glanced at her in shock. You mean to ride out in full sight? They will see us? She climbed onto the saddle without hesitation. Sometimes the boldest path is the safest.
Come.
He swung up behind her and held on as she urged the horse forward. The gates loomed ahead, guarded by two men who turned in surprise at the sound of hooves. Claire struck hard with her command, her voice sharp and royal, ordering the gates open in her mother's name. The guards, confused and stiff, pulled the chains aside, and the heavy gates creaked wide. The horse tore into the night, galloping past torches and out into the open roads. Behind them, shouts rose as the guards at last realized what had happened, but the festival noise and fireworks drowned their cries. Daniel held tight, his heart racing, the wind against his face sharp and clean. For the first time in days, he felt the breath of freedom. Where will we go? He shouted over the rush of air. Far Claire called back. Anywhere that is not behind my mother's walls. Anywhere we can build life with our own choice. It's not under a crown's chain. The road stretched out ahead, trees lining the path, stars scattered above like silver fire. Daniel had no idea what awaited them beyond the kingdom, but it no longer mattered. He had kept his promise to Claire, and she had risked everything for him. Behind them, the palace still glowed against the dark. Inside its walls, Queen Eleanor would discover her prisoner gone and her daughter vanished. Her wrath would shake the council, and her armies would be sent searching. But none of that touched the two riders on the road. Daniel's arms tightened around Claire as they vanished into the night. He felt the power of choice burning in his chest, stronger than chains, stronger than fear. He was no longer bound to the queen. He was free, and alongside him rode a princess who believed in his worth beyond blood. And so the man who once saved a princess with his own lifeblood rode into the future not as a prisoner of a throne, but as a man of his own making, guided by courage and a bond that no crown could break.